I can't believe I had to wait all the way until this series' 5th episode to have any semblance of enjoyment out of this program. Considering this episode runs the gamut from Jaws to Pennywise, Werewolves to Gremlins, this, the creature feature, should have been the 2-parter.
They can be frightening, or fun, or both. Whatever their size or shape.
I'm glad to see that they show Krampus some love, especially since they transition into this movie from Gremlins.
Time to float.
The latest addition to the Monster Hall of Fame is Pennywise the Clown, the killer creature at the heart of the 2017 blockbuster, It. Based on the 1986 novel by legendary horror writer Stephen King, It tells the story of 7 young outcasts in Derry, Maine. They battle an ancient evil that emerges every 27 years to kill the town's children.
It was a mainstream movie that was rated R. It grossed $700 million worldwide, and not only that, it was a good film.
I really can't say enough good things about the It Chapter 1 movie. For a film I was so afraid would be botched or tame, the story and characters really knocked it out of the park. I mean, $700 million for a horror movie. That's damn near Marvel money. I'm glad they tried to differentiate Pennywise between Tim Curry and Bill Skarsgård.
Beep, beep, Richie.
The first goal was to make it different from the Tim Curry interpretation.
Beep, beep, Richie.
I felt that there was something about Pennywise that wasn't covered there. I also wanted to bring weird balance of a monster and a child. If you see the design of the monster, he has like childlike features. He's like roundy face and you know, the buggy teeth.
Rewatching the opening to It Chapter 1, it's such a swift kick to your crotch and delivers the message that this film ain't messing around. It's a reminder to me how that film brought legitimacy to the term modern classic and blew all other posers right out of the water.
It is really about the horrors of society. The scariest things in that book are not supernatural. The scariest things in that book are racism, misogyny.
She'll do you. You just gotta ask nicely.
And child abuse.
You sure there ain't a clown in there somewhere, other than your circus hair dye?
By the end of the film, conservative forces from without reduce her to a sort of wordless, helpless woman who, you know, has to be basically carried out of the house and is now afraid of everything. And in other words, a much more acceptable vision of what a housewife should be.
Okay, now that you got that out of your system.
The Birds is a masterful suspense film and a disturbing projection of Alfred Hitchcock's conflicted feelings about female sexuality.
Dear God, just one episode. I'm begging.
You know, there's some things I forgot to tell you guys, and they're really important. Keep them away from water. Don't ever feed him after midnight.
Reviewing the rules for the Gremlins reminded me how fun that film was, and what a turn it takes from warm and fuzzy to Looney Tunes levels of PG violence. I'm glad they're adult enough to admit and spotlight how Gremlins was ripped off.
It was ripped off all over the place. The Ghoulies and Critters, and yes, I did Critters too.
The size of their leader.
To me, Gremlins was really great gateway horror. By gateway horror, I'm referring to movies that are scary enough for the whole family. I think it's good for kids to watch scary movies.
Exactly. That's something that Twilight apologists will never understand. The point of reaching out to different audiences is to usher them into horror, not to outright embarrass the genre. More on that on a different episode.
If Gremlins is the lighter side of killer creatures, John Carpenter's The Thing is the darkest of the dark. The film's shapeshifters embody our most paranoid suspicions that the people we know and trust are actually inhuman monsters.
John Carpenter's The Thing is just one of those movies that's endlessly enjoyable to watch, discuss, and hear other people talk about. For a box office flop to have gotten the recognition it deserves over the past nearly 40 years has been a delight. The perfect horror movie.
It's like the holy grail of horror movies. It's a perfect movie.
The horror sort of truism was things can be real good and scary until you see the monster. And Rob Bottin, special effects guy, said, well, what if we show them the monster constantly? But the trick is that the monster is a different monster every time. I mean, that's just brilliantly leaning into the problem.
Notice how much more engaging and insightful this guy is to listen to when he dispenses with his moral grandstanding and focuses on a film's qualities.
It's also an unparalleled FX showcase. You know, we see these creatures that have no real form or structure, but that come from the deepest nightmares that we could possibly fathom.
But some of the most terrifying movies ever made show us what might happen if everyday animals became killer creatures. The fear of suddenly being at the bottom of the food chain is the premise of the first man versus nature horror film, Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds.
To take what most people consider a pretty innocuous animal, like not an animal to be feared, and to turn it into something that terrifying, that still really works. I mean, that scene when she turns around and they're all sitting there is terrifying. It would be terrifying for us to experience that in life.
Spotted a gold mine with a freshly washed beauty. Roger, dirty bird. Let's rock and roll. All right, Skyrat, make it messy. The boys, quick! Afterburners, afterburners!
One thing this documentary has going for it is it serves as an excuse to see familiar faces. Dee Wallace is always a welcome sight.
I had no idea how tough it would be. In a horror film, there's a lot, if you're doing it right, there's a lot of emotional work.
Man, with the muck and grime on Cujo, you really believe that this dog is infected.
It was relentless. And it is, I think, my best work and the film I'm most proud of.
In 1975, a young director named Steven Spielberg made a film about a giant man-eating shark prowling the New England coastline. Jaws was the first summer blockbuster, and it's the ultimate animal attack movie.
Not just one of the forefathers of creature effects or the architect for modern monsters, but the undeniable granddaddy of summer blockbuster films.
The little things, like the coming up on somebody, just the feeling. It's not actual shark coming up, but you feel like she's done.
It is about this basic human terror. The understanding that we are a snack for sharks.
To think that despite humans as complex creatures capable of emotions, art, and technology on an intellectual spectrum, you are watered down to just food in the eyes and in the mouth of something bigger on a strictly primal level.
Slow ahead. I can go slow ahead. Come on down and chump some of this.
Not seeing the shark a lot was a good thing for the audience, because I didn't want to see it anymore because it was too intense.
You're going to need a bigger boat.
There's an element where Spielberg was forced into really creative ways of showing suspense because his major special effect didn't work. And I'm sure he would agree that if the mechanical shark had worked a bit better, you might have seen the shark more, and maybe it would be a lesser film.
I never get tired of hearing about the malfunctioning mechanical shark. Because you see less of it, the shots you do see really deliver, and that's why it's such a classic.
The idea of the werewolf not as the evil, aggressive perpetrator of death and murder, but as the victim of a curse. That's a Hollywood screenwriter. That's Kurt Siodmak's invention with the Wolfman in the 40s. You know, werewolves being killed by silver bullets. You know where that came from? He was listening to the Lone Ranger, who had silver bullets, and he thought, we could melt crucifixes. So many of Kurt Siodmak's inventions became ancient lore of the werewolf.
See, this is why you need the real deal legends, to offer a little Hollywood tidbits and behind-the-scenes trivia that make your horror favorites all the more enjoyable.
Kurt Siodmak fled Europe because of the Nazi threat. And in the Wolfman films, you can see things that he's very consciously put there. It's no coincidence that a person is marked for death by the appearance of a star in their palm. Obviously, this was a technique the Nazis used.
American Werewolf in London, The Howling, those movies were really the age of makeup effects.
Are you sure about that? I heard differently from some pissant named Eli Roth.
After John Carpenter's Halloween made box office history in 1978, slasher films ruled the screen. The Wolfman films of the 40s were a great influence on two horror classics, both released in 1981. The Howling and An American Werewolf in London.
One has to marvel how after 39 years, An American Werewolf is still unparalleled and uncontested as the greatest werewolf movie of all time. They were able to pull off this creature design in a time before big budgets and CGI. They were able to trick the mind because they fooled the eyes.
American Werewolf in London had Rick Baker's effects, and The Howling had Rob Bottin. Rick Baker's protege was doing the effects. So there's some crossover that they came out in the same year, and they had some of the same effects.
The Howling was a perfectly timed movie about the California self-help movement period. It's a great satire and mockery of that.
Hippies. I couldn't think of a better note to go out on to end this review of creature features than The Werewolf. Not only one of the all-time classics, but also an icon of makeup effects. I hope you enjoyed my review of this episode, as it was by far my favorite of this documentary.
Monsters are reflections of ourselves.
They do represent a lot of our deeper psychological fears. We sort of designed them to represent everything that we feel is ugly about ourselves.
Monsters are metaphors. Name the monster, name the metaphor. Jekyll and Hyde is essentially about psychopharmacology. Frankenstein, it's don't with God.